You expect me to believe this Ferrari belongs to you? People like you don't just own cars like this.
The car is mine, officer. My license, registration, and insurance are inside, and you can verify everything.
I've heard that story before. Turn around now, before you make this situation much worse for yourself.
I am not resisting or reaching for anything. Please run the license plate before you put your hands on me.
Stop telling me how to do my job. People driving stolen cars always have some convincing explanation ready.
Then let the record speak, because every camera in this parking lot is capturing exactly what you are doing.
Officer Travis Rourke ignored the registration, twisted Marissa Cole's arm behind her back, and locked handcuffs around her wrists while his partner watched. Neither officer knew the woman they had accused of stealing her own Ferrari was a federal judge who understood exactly how to expose every lie they told next. The red Ferrari SF90 gleamed under the afternoon sun like a polished ruby. Judge Marissa Cole reached for the driver's door handle, her mind still focused on the successful morning she'd spent selecting a gift for her niece's graduation. The luxury shopping center buzzed with Saturday activity around her. A heavy hand slammed against her shoulder. "Where'd you steal it?" Marissa froze. The grip twisted into the fabric of her denim jacket, yanking her backward from the open door. She turned to face a white police officer whose face burned with certainty and rage. "Excuse me?" Marissa kept her voice level despite the shock. Officer Travis Rourke towered over her, his chest puffed with authority. His name tag caught the light as he leaned closer. "You heard me? Where'd you steal this car?" "This Ferrari belongs to me." Marissa raised both hands slowly, palms open and visible. "Please remove your hand from my jacket." Rourke's grip tightened instead. "Sure it does. And I'm the Easter Bunny. My identification is right there." Marissa nodded toward the open driver's door. "My license, registration, insurance card, and key fob are all inside. You can verify ownership in less than 2 minutes. Anyone can fake papers these days." Rourke's eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "Especially for a ride this expensive. You think I was born yesterday?" The Ferrari's interior showed her leather purse sitting on the passenger seat. Her wallet lay open, displaying her federal judicial identification card beside her driver's license. The key fob rested in the center console, its red Ferrari logo clearly visible. Insurance and registration cards peeked from the visor pocket. "Officer, those documents are genuine." Marissa kept her hands raised. "The VIN number on the dashboard matches my registration. The license plate is registered to my name. I purchased this vehicle from Ferrari of Denver 6 months ago." Criminals say that kind of stuff all the time. Rourke positioned himself between Marissa and the car door. Rich ladies probably reported this baby missing by now. A second patrol car pulled into the parking lot. Officer Dean Mercer stepped out, his expression cautious as he approached. Shoppers began gathering at a respectful distance. Several phones appeared, their cameras pointed toward the scene. "What's going on, Rourke?" Mercer asked. "Got ourselves a car thief." Rourke jerked his thumb toward the Ferrari. "Claims this SF90 belongs to her." Mercer glanced at Marissa, then at the luxury vehicle. "Did you check her papers?" "Don't need to. Look at her, then look at this ride. Something ain't adding up." Marissa felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "Am I being detained, officer?" Rourke's face darkened. "You getting smart with me now? Asking lawyer questions?" "I'm asking a legal question that requires a clear answer." "Here's your clear answer, lady. You don't ask the questions here." "I do." Rourke stepped closer, forcing Marissa back against the Ferrari's doorframe. "And right now, I'm asking how a woman like you ended up behind the wheel of a $250,000 sports car." The crowd grew larger. Whispers rippled through the gathering shoppers as more cameras captured the confrontation. Marissa noticed a mother pulling her young daughter closer while keeping her phone steady. "Step away from the vehicle, Rourke commanded. "Mercer, run this plate. Let's see what comes back." While Rourke focused on positioning Marissa away from the Ferrari, she lowered her right hand toward her phone. Her fingers found the device's side buttons through her jacket pocket. 3 quick presses in sequence activated the emergency alert linked to her federal judicial security detail. The signal transmitted silently. "Hands where I can see them," Rourke barked. Marissa raised both hands again, her emergency alert already sent. Somewhere across the city, Deputy U.S. Marshal Elias Grant was receiving notification that a federal judge required immediate assistance. Rourke had no idea what was coming. Mercer stood beside his patrol car, one hand pressed to his earpiece as the radio crackled with dispatch communications. The license plate number rolled across his notepad in careful block letters while he waited for the system to process the Ferrari's information. Rourke maintained his grip on Marissa's shoulder, his knuckles white against the denim fabric of her jacket. "What's taking so long, Mercer? How hard is it to run a stolen vehicle?" "System's working on it," Mercer replied, his voice tight with concentration. The crowd of shoppers pressed closer, their phones creating a semicircle of recording devices. A teenage boy held his phone high above the heads in front of him while his girlfriend whispered commentary. An elderly man in a golf shirt shook his head and muttered something about police procedure to his wife. Marissa kept her hands visible and her posture straight despite Rourke's restraining grip. "Officer, you're causing a public disturbance based on an assumption. Check my identification and end this peacefully." "Shut up." Rourke's fingers dug deeper into her shoulder. "You'll talk when I tell you to talk." The radio in Mercer's earpiece delivered its verdict with mechanical precision. His face shifted as he absorbed the information. He walked closer to Rourke, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. "Travis, the vehicle comes back clean. Registered to Marissa Evelyn Cole. Same name that's on the license in her wallet." Rourke's jaw tightened, but his grip didn't loosen. "That don't mean nothing. Identity theft happens every day. She could have stolen the real owner's whole life." "The VIN matches, too," Mercer continued. "Registration's current. No outstanding warrants, no liens, no theft reports. Everything checks out legitimate." Marissa heard every word of their hushed conversation. "Officers, now that you've confirmed ownership, I'd like to continue with my day." "Like hell you will." Rourke spun her around to face the Ferrari. "Smart criminals steal more than cars. They steal identities, credit histories, whole financial profiles. Just because some computer says you're Marissa Cole, don't make it true." "My dealership application is on my phone," Marissa said calmly. "Ferrari of Denver keeps digital records of every purchase. The sales manager's contact information is saved in my contacts. Call him." Rourke pressed her harder against the car's doorframe. "Could be a fake phone with fake contacts. Could be your partner in crime, pretending to be the sales manager." The crowd murmured louder as more people realized what they were witnessing. A woman in yoga pants stepped forward, her phone camera trained on Rourke's face. "This is wrong," she called out. "She's showing you proof, and you won't even look at it." "Ma'am, step back," Rourke shouted without turning around. "This is police business." Marissa noticed the small blue light blinking behind her Ferrari's windshield. The security camera had activated automatically when the door opened, just as it was programmed to do. She spoke loud enough for both officers to hear clearly. "Officer Rourke, I'm informing you that this vehicle contains a professionally installed security camera with encrypted remote backup. Everything happening here is being recorded and uploaded to a secure server." Rourke's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Oh, now you're trying to scare me? Recording, huh? Like that's supposed to make me back down. I'm providing you with factual information about evidence preservation." "Evidence of what? You being a car thief?" Rourke twisted her right arm behind her back with sudden violence. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Marissa gasped, but remained standing. The crowd's murmur turned into angry shouts as they watched Rourke force her into an arrest position against the Ferrari's gleaming red hood. "I am not resisting," Marissa said clearly, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "I am not fighting you. I am complying with your commands." "She ain't fighting!" someone yelled from the crowd. "Leave her alone!" Mercer approached with handcuffs, his face pale with obvious discomfort. He'd heard dispatch confirm that Marissa Evelyn Cole was the registered owner of the Ferrari. He'd seen her identification lying open in plain view. He knew the arrest was based on nothing more than Rourke's stubborn refusal to admit error. But he opened the handcuffs anyway. "I am not resisting," Marissa repeated as the metal closed around her wrists. "I have provided identification. I have offered verification through the dealership. I have cooperated completely." "Save it for the judge," Rourke snarled. He leaned into the Ferrari's interior, his eyes focusing on the small camera mount behind the rearview mirror. The blue recording light pulsed steadily as it documented his every movement. With deliberate satisfaction, Rourke reached up and disconnected the camera's memory card. He held the small black square above his head like a trophy, grinning at the crowd of shocked witnesses. "There goes your precious recording, lady. Hope you got a good lawyer, 'cause you're gonna need one." Marissa looked at him with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. Her voice carried no anger, no fear, no desperation, just simple, factual clarity. "You removed the local copy. You did not remove the recording." The unmarked black sedan pulled into the shopping center's parking lot with deliberate precision, weaving through the maze of abandoned shopping carts and curious onlookers. The driver parked 20 feet from the patrol cars, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid appearing confrontational. Deputy U.S. Marshal Elias Grant stepped out of the vehicle with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to volatile situations. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, wearing a dark suit that marked him as federal law enforcement, even without visible badges. His eyes swept across the scene methodically, cataloging details with practiced efficiency. Rourke had one hand on Marissa's shoulder and the other reaching for the patrol car's rear door handle. The handcuffs caught the afternoon sunlight as she stood beside the Ferrari, her posture straight despite her restraints. Mercer was arguing with a group of witnesses who refused to move farther back from the arrest scene. "People, I need you to step away," Mercer called out, his voice strained with growing frustration. "This is an active police investigation. You're interfering with official business." A middle-aged woman in a business suit held her phone steady as she recorded. "We're on public property. We have the right to witness police conduct. Ma'am, you need to move back at least 15 feet, or you'll be charged with obstruction." "Obstruction of what?" The woman's voice rose with indignation. "Obstruction of watching you arrest someone for owning her own car?" Grant approached the scene with his hands visible and his federal credentials held clearly in front of him. He spoke in a voice that carried authority without aggression, the tone of someone who expected to be heard and obeyed. "Officers, I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Elias Grant, Judicial Security Division." He held up his badge and identification for both men to see. "I received an emergency alert from this location. Can you explain why a member of the federal judiciary is currently restrained beside a vehicle registered in her name?" Rourke's hand froze on the patrol car door. His face went pale as the meaning of Grant's words settled into his consciousness. Federal judiciary, emergency alert. Vehicle registered in her name. "What did you just say?" Rourke's voice cracked slightly. Grant stepped closer, his eyes moving between Marissa and the two officers. "I asked why Judge Marissa Cole is handcuffed beside her own Ferrari." The words hit the crowd like electricity. "Judge Cole?" someone whispered. "She's a federal judge?" The murmur spread quickly through the gathering witnesses as phones turned toward Grant's federal identification. Mercer's shoulders sagged, as he realized the magnitude of what they had done. His argument with the witnesses died mid-sentence as he stared at the woman they had arrested, a federal judge. They had handcuffed and arrested a federal judge for allegedly stealing her own car. "Judge Cole," Grant continued, addressing Marissa directly with formal respect, "are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" Marissa turned toward Grant, while remaining in position beside the patrol car. Her voice carried the same calm professionalism she had maintained throughout the confrontation. "Deputy Grant, I am not injured. However, I want it clearly understood that my judicial office does not change the legal standard for evaluating this arrest. I am not requesting special treatment based on my position." "Understood, Your Honor, but I need to document the circumstances that led to your detention." Rourke's mind raced as he tried to process the disaster unfolding before him. A federal judge. He had grabbed, handcuffed, and prepared to arrest a federal judge based on his assumption that no black woman could legitimately own a Ferrari SF90. The crowd was recording everything. A deputy U.S. Marshal was demanding explanations. She didn't identify herself as a judge," Rourke stammered. "She never said nothing about being federal law enforcement." Grant walked to the Ferrari's open door and examined the identification documents scattered across the passenger seat. Marissa's driver's license lay beside her insurance card and registration. Underneath both was a distinctive federal judicial identification card bearing her photograph and the seal of the United States District Court. "Officer, her federal identification is clearly visible beside her state license. Both documents display her full name, which matches the vehicle registration that dispatch has already verified." Mercer stepped forward, his face flushed with obvious embarrassment. "Sir, dispatch did confirm ownership before we applied the handcuffs. The vehicle registration came back clean under her name. Before the handcuffs were applied," Grant's voice sharpened with professional interest, "you arrested Judge Cole after confirming she owns the vehicle?" Rourke's panic transformed into desperate aggression. He could not admit that he had continued the arrest after learning the truth. His reputation, his career, his entire sense of professional identity depended on being right. If he was wrong about this, he could be wrong about anything. "That ain't the whole story," Rourke said, his voice growing louder. "Yeah, maybe the car belongs to her, but she got combative when I tried to investigate. She reached toward my duty belt. She was going for my equipment." The crowd erupted in immediate contradiction. "That's a lie!" the woman in yoga pants shouted. "She never moved toward you. She kept her hands up the whole time." "She was trying to grab something from my belt," Rourke insisted, doubling down on his new accusation. "I had to restrain her for officer safety. That's why she's under arrest." Grant's expression hardened as he realized what was happening. Faced with the collapse of their theft allegation, the officers were manufacturing a completely different crime. He reached into his jacket and withdrew his phone, activating the camera function with deliberate visibility. "Officers, I'm documenting the scene and recording both of your body cameras' operational status." Grant photographed the flashing lights on both officers' chest-mounted devices. Every recording from those cameras, every dispatch transmission, and every report revision connected to this incident must now be preserved under federal evidence protocols. The blue lights on both cameras pulsed steadily as Grant's photos captured their active status. The recordings they contained would either support or destroy Rourke's claim that Marissa had reached for his equipment. "You got no authority here," Rourke protested. "This is a local matter. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law is a federal crime," Grant replied calmly, "especially when the victim is a sitting federal judge." A black SUV with police markings pulled into the parking lot, its emergency lights casting red and blue shadows across the gathered crowd. Lieutenant Wade Voss stepped out with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling crisis situations. His gray hair was perfectly trimmed, his uniform pressed and clean, and his expression carried the calm confidence of a supervisor arriving to restore order. Voss surveyed the scene methodically. A red Ferrari SF90 sat with its driver door open. Two of his officers flanked a handcuffed black woman beside a patrol car. A deputy U.S. Marshal was photographing their body cameras and taking notes. At least 30 witnesses stood behind the police tape, many holding phones and speaking in urgent whispers about federal judges and wrongful arrests. His eyes found Marissa immediately. Wade Voss had attended multiple courthouse security briefings where Judge Marissa Cole presided over coordination between federal and local law enforcement. He recognized her face, her posture, and the way she maintained dignity even while restrained. This was not some random Ferrari owner they could intimidate into silence. This was a disaster. "Rourke, Mercer, step over here," Voss commanded, his voice cutting through the parking lot noise. "Now!" Both officers approached their supervisor while Grant continued documenting the scene. Voss positioned himself so the crowd could not hear their conversation, but Grant's federal authority allowed him to remain within listening distance. "Explain this situation," Voss ordered quietly. Rourke's words came out in a rush. "Lieutenant, we got a call about a suspicious vehicle moving through the shopping center. High-end car. Driver didn't match the usual profile. When we approached, she got defensive and wouldn't cooperate properly. Did you run the plates?" Mercer shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, sir. Dispatch confirmed the vehicle is registered to Marissa Evelyn Cole. Same name on her driver's license." Voss felt his stomach drop. "When did you receive that confirmation?" "Before we applied the handcuffs," Mercer admitted. The lieutenant stared at both officers as the full scope of their mistake became clear. They had arrested a federal judge for stealing her own car after proving she owned it. Every witness in the parking lot had watched it happen. A deputy U.S. Marshal was documenting everything. The theft accusation was dead. It would never survive contact with the evidence, the witnesses, or any competent defense attorney. But releasing Judge Cole now would require admitting that two of his officers had committed a clear civil rights violation in front of dozens of cameras. Voss made his decision. "Here's what happened," he told his officers in a low voice. "The vehicle stop was legitimate based on the suspicious activity call. Judge Cole became uncooperative and physically resistant when questioned. Officer Rourke had to restrain her when she reached toward his equipment belt. She's being arrested for obstruction, resisting, and attempted interference with a police officer's weapon." "Lieutenant," Mercer started, "she never actually reached toward—" "That's your report," Voss cut him off. "Both of you sign it. The Ferrari gets seized as evidence pending investigation." Grant stepped closer, his phone held openly in recording position. "Lieutenant Voss, I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Elias Grant. I'm formally requesting preservation of all digital recordings, dispatch transmissions, parking lot surveillance footage, and officer reports connected to this incident. Any alteration or deletion of evidence will be considered federal obstruction." Voss turned toward Grant with forced calm. "Deputy, this is a routine local police matter. Judge Cole was detained following proper procedures. After ownership of the vehicle was verified, the investigation involves more than simple ownership verification." Grant photographed the Ferrari's interior, focusing on the visible insurance documents, registration papers, and federal identification card. He documented the mileage displayed on the dashboard, the position of the key fob in the center console, and the small blue recording light visible behind the windshield. Moving around the vehicle, Grant captured images of the pristine condition of the SF90's exterior, the camera mount behind the windshield, and the absence of any damage or suspicious modifications. Every photograph carried metadata, proving when and where it was taken. Voss approached Marissa while Grant continued his documentation. "Judge Cole, this situation has gotten unnecessarily complicated. If you're willing to acknowledge that the stop resulted from a reasonable misunderstanding about suspicious vehicle activity, we can resolve everything quietly and get you back to your day." Marissa looked directly at the lieutenant. Her voice carried the same composed authority she used from the bench. "Lieutenant Voss, I recognize you from courthouse security meetings. You know exactly who I am. You also know that nothing about this arrest was reasonable or lawful. Judge, sometimes situations escalate beyond anyone's intention. A simple acknowledgement that quietly is how conduct like this survives," Marissa interrupted. "I will not participate in covering up civil rights violations, regardless of any personal convenience it might offer me." Voss's expression hardened. "Then the Ferrari remains seized as evidence. Officers, transport the defendant." Rourke and Mercer moved toward Marissa to guide her into the patrol car. She did not resist or protest. As they helped her into the back seat, she turned toward Grant one final time. "Deputy Grant, preserve the 37 seconds of recording before Officer Rourke first touched me. That is where their theft investigation became a crime." The patrol car's engine hummed steadily as it carried Marissa through the city streets toward the downtown station. She sat in the back seat with her hands still cuffed behind her, watching familiar buildings pass through the reinforced window. The Ferrari had disappeared onto an impound truck under Lieutenant Voss's direct supervision, its red paint gleaming under the afternoon sun as it vanished behind the vehicle's metal ramp. Deputy Marshal Grant followed in his unmarked federal vehicle, maintaining visual contact with the transport while simultaneously coordinating with his office through hands-free communication. Every turn, every stop, every minute of transit time was being documented in real-time reports that would become part of the permanent federal record. Officer Rourke drove while Mercer rode in the passenger seat, both men unusually quiet after their supervisor's instructions. The radio crackled occasionally with routine dispatch traffic, but neither officer responded to calls that might delay their arrival at the station. Voss had been clear about processing this arrest quickly and completely. "Booking's going to want the theft report first," Mercer said finally, breaking the silence. "Then that's what they get," Rourke replied, though his voice carried less confidence than usual. At the station, the booking area buzzed with its typical afternoon activity. Officers processed misdemeanor arrests while clerks handled paperwork and phone calls. The institutional fluorescent lighting cast everything in harsh white, making the beige walls appear even more sterile than usual. Sergeant Patricia Williams had worked booking for 12 years. She had processed thousands of arrests and developed an instinct for cases that would collapse before reaching trial. When Rourke and Mercer approached her desk with their handcuffed prisoner, something about their demeanor immediately caught her attention. "What do we have?" Williams asked, pulling up the arrest form template on her computer. "Auto theft, obstruction, and resisting," Rourke answered, producing his preliminary report. Williams began entering the charges while Marissa stood quietly between the two officers. The booking sergeant's fingers paused over the keyboard as she read through Rourke's narrative describing the Ferrari seizure and the defendant's supposed theft of a vehicle worth over $300,000. "Registration came back to who?" Williams asked. "Marissa Evelyn Cole," Mercer answered reluctantly. "Same person you've got standing here?" "Yes, but—" "VIN check?" Rourke shifted uncomfortably. "Matches the registration." Williams looked at both officers, then at Marissa, then back at the computer screen. "Insurance verification?" "Current policy in the defendant's name," Mercer admitted. "Dealership records?" "Ferrari of Beverly Hills shows a cash purchase 18 months ago by Marissa Evelyn Cole." Sergeant Williams stopped typing entirely. She had seen plenty of questionable arrests during her career, but rarely had officers brought her someone accused of stealing their own properly documented vehicle with current registration, valid insurance, and dealership verification. "Officers, I cannot enter an auto theft charge when every piece of evidence proves the defendant owns the vehicle in question." Rourke's face flushed red. "Sergeant, there were other suspicious circumstances that— The state of California requires reasonable belief that a crime occurred before I can book someone for that crime. Where's your reasonable belief that this woman stole her own car?" The booking area had grown quieter as other officers and staff began listening to the exchange. Williams's voice carried clearly across the room, and everyone present understood that two officers were being publicly challenged about the foundation of their arrest. "Remove the theft charge," Williams ordered. "I will not put my name on paperwork this thin." Rourke was forced to cross out the auto theft accusation on his preliminary report while a dozen colleagues watched. His hand shook slightly as he drew the lines through his own words, suffering his first visible defeat in front of people who would remember and discuss it long after his shift ended. Lieutenant Voss arrived just as Williams was rejecting the original charges. He surveyed the booking area quickly, noting the attention focused on his officers and the obvious tension around the processing desk. "What's the delay?" Voss asked. Williams explained her refusal to accept the theft charge based on the overwhelming evidence of legitimate ownership. Voss listened without expression, then leaned closer to speak privately with the booking sergeant. "Sergeant Williams, the arrest involves obstruction of a lawful investigation and attempted interference with Officer Rourke's weapon. The vehicle seizure is connected to those charges, not simple theft." "Then that's what goes in the system," Williams replied. "But I want it noted that the theft allegation was removed due to insufficient evidence." Voss nodded to Rourke, who began writing the replacement charges on a fresh arrest form. The new report described Marissa as becoming physically aggressive during questioning, reaching toward Rourke's equipment belt, and using her judicial position to intimidate responding officers. Williams read through the revised charges while Grant arrived, and positioned himself where he could observe the booking process. The deputy marshal's presence reminded everyone that this arrest would receive federal scrutiny at every stage. "Ma'am," Williams addressed Marissa directly, "do you want to contact anyone before processing continues?" "No special calls," Marissa answered clearly. "Process me exactly like any other defendant." Williams appreciated the response. Too often, prominent citizens tried to leverage their positions during arrest, creating complications that lasted for months. Marissa's refusal to invoke her judicial authority would prevent Voss from later claiming she had escaped consequences through influence or corruption. Grant approached the booking desk and presented his credentials to Sergeant Williams. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Grant, I'm issuing formal preservation notices for all digital evidence connected to this arrest, including body camera footage, dispatch recordings, parking lot surveillance, impound documentation, and any subsequent report revisions." "Understood, Deputy," Williams replied, making notes in the case file. Grant handed Williams a series of federal forms requiring the department to maintain complete chain of custody records for all physical and digital evidence. Any alteration, deletion, or loss of materials would trigger automatic federal investigation. The booking process continued with fingerprinting, photographing, and property documentation. Marissa submitted to each step without protest, maintaining the dignified composure that had impressed colleagues throughout her judicial career. As Williams completed the paperwork, she quietly noted something that would become important later. The language in the obstruction report sounded familiar. She had seen similar phrasing in other arrests involving expensive vehicles and defendants who supposedly became aggressive when questioned about ownership. Several hours later, Marissa walked out of the station without her Ferrari. The red SF90 remained locked behind the impound facility's gates, under an evidence hold that could theoretically last for months. Grant waited beside his vehicle in the parking lot as Marissa emerged into the late afternoon sunlight. She had been released on her own recognizance pending formal charges, but the legal battle was just beginning. "Judge Cole," Grant said as she approached, "Lieutenant Voss has transformed a failed theft accusation into something much larger. This isn't about one mistake anymore. He's declared war on your credibility, and he's planning to fight it, using every resource his department controls." The impound facility sat behind 12-foot chain link topped with razor wire, its entrance guarded by a weathered office trailer and electronic gates that buzzed loudly when activated. Marissa and Grant arrived 15 minutes before closing time. The deputy marshal carrying a leather portfolio containing federal evidence preservation forms and a high-resolution camera equipped with timestamp verification. The facility manager, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, met them at the gate with obvious reluctance. "I got orders from Lieutenant Voss about this vehicle. Nobody gets access without his direct approval." Grant displayed his credentials and handed Rodriguez a judicial inspection order signed by an independent federal magistrate. "This supersedes any local restrictions, sir. We're here to document the Ferrari's condition before it disappears into your storage system." Rodriguez studied the federal paperwork carefully, then unlocked the gate with a resigned expression. "Vehicles in Section C, Space 47. But I'm telling you right now, that car's under the tightest evidence hold I've ever seen. Voss made it real clear that anything happens to it, my facility gets blamed." They walked through rows of seized vehicles toward the back corner, where premium cars were stored separately from routine impounds. The red Ferrari SF90 sat alone in a marked space, its distinctive profile unmistakable even under the harsh overhead lighting that buzzed and flickered in the gathering dusk. Yellow evidence tape sealed every door and panel. Numbered tags hung from each wheel well, the side mirrors, and the rear spoiler. A large placard attached to the windshield declared the vehicle off-limits to unauthorized personnel under penalty of federal prosecution. Grant began photographing immediately, documenting each seal's position, condition, and identifying number. The camera's flash illuminated details that would become crucial later. The exact placement of the evidence tags, the position of the side mirrors, the angle of the steering wheel visible through the driver's window. "Odometer reading?" Grant asked, peering through the windshield. 4,212 miles, Marissa read from outside the passenger door. "Same as when they arrested me." Grant photographed the instrument cluster through the glass, capturing not only the mileage but the fuel level, warning lights, and gear selector position. Every detail would matter if anyone attempted to claim the Ferrari had been driven or altered while impounded. The small blue recording light behind the windshield remained dark, its camera system powered down with the engine off. Grant photographed the mount carefully, noting its professional installation and the intact connection cables that ran toward the dashboard. "Ma'am," Rodriguez interrupted, "I need to tell you about the access log. Lieutenant Voss authorized himself, Officer Rourke, and Officer Mercer for unlimited entry. That's unusual for an evidence hold." Marissa turned sharply. "Unlimited entry without oversight? That's what the paperwork says. They can come and go as needed for their investigation." Grant photographed the access authorization form, focusing on Voss's signature, and the phrase "investigative necessity" written in the justification field. The document gave the three officers permission to examine, photograph, and collect samples from the Ferrari without requiring a neutral witness or independent oversight. "This vehicle contains encrypted digital evidence," Grant told Rodriguez. "Any unauthorized access could constitute tampering with federal court proceedings. I'm filing a written demand that no officer enter this Ferrari without a neutral witness present and documented." He handed Rodriguez an official federal preservation notice that required the facility to maintain detailed logs of every person who approached the vehicle, touched any surface, or requested access to the storage area. The form carried criminal penalties for false statements or missing documentation. As Grant completed his photographic documentation, footsteps approached from behind the neighboring vehicles. Officer Rourke emerged from between two seized trucks, his uniform rumpled and his expression hostile. He had been waiting for them. "Well, well," Rourke called out, stopping just outside the storage area. "The judge finally came to visit her precious car." Marissa faced him without stepping closer to the fence. Officer Rourke, I assume you're here on official business? Just making sure everything stays secure, Rourke replied with a cold smile. You know, Judge, owning that Ferrari on paper doesn't mean you're ever going to drive it again. Evidence holds can last a real long time when there's ongoing criminal investigation. Grant continued photographing while listening to the exchange, capturing images of the vehicle's position relative to the fence and documenting Rourke's proximity to the evidence area. Every seizure leaves records, Marissa answered calmly. Every access request gets logged. Every broken seal creates documentation. Every person who touches my car becomes part of a chain of custody that federal courts will examine very carefully. Rourke's smile faded slightly. You threatening me, Judge? I'm stating facts about evidence preservation, Officer Rourke. Facts you should understand from your training. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably between them, clearly wanting the confrontation to end before his facility became associated with any impropriety. Folks, we close in 5 minutes. I need to secure the area. Grant finished his final photographs and handed Rodriguez a card with his contact information. Deputy Marshal Grant, Federal Judicial Security. Call me immediately if anyone requests access to this vehicle or if any seal is disturbed for any reason. As they walked back toward the gate, Rourke called after them. Enjoy the bus ride home, Judge. Hope you didn't get too attached to that Ferrari. Marissa paused at the gate and looked back through the chain link toward her car. The SF90 sat isolated under the harsh lights, sealed and tagged like evidence of a crime that never happened. The sight should have been infuriating, but instead it strengthened her resolve. The impound gate closed between Marissa and the Ferrari with a loud clang that echoed across the facility. Rodriguez secured the electronic lock and activated the overnight alarm system that would log any movement or disturbance in the storage area. Grant carried away a complete photographic record documenting the Ferrari's condition, the evidence seal's positions, the access authorization irregularities, and Rourke's unauthorized presence at the facility. The deputy marshal's leather portfolio now contained enough preservation notices and federal forms to make any evidence tampering a federal crime with serious consequences. The conference room at Marissa's attorney's office felt cramped despite its size. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting harsh shadows across the polished table, where 3 copies of Officer Rourke's official incident report lay spread before them. Marissa had managed only scattered fragments of sleep, her mind replaying every moment from the parking lot confrontation to Rourke's taunting words at the impound facility. Her civil rights attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency. Grant sat across from them, his federal credentials displayed on the table beside a thick folder of photographs and preservation notices. This report is a work of fiction, the attorney said without looking up. Complete fiction designed to justify an unjustifiable arrest. Marissa read Rourke's statement aloud, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. Subject refused to provide identification when requested, and became evasive when questioned about vehicle ownership. Subject concealed her judicial position in an apparent attempt to avoid legitimate police inquiry. That's a lie, Marissa continued. My license was visible in my open wallet. My judicial identification was lying right beside it. I told him exactly who I was and that the Ferrari belonged to me. Grant pointed to a specific paragraph. Here's where it gets worse. Rourke writes, when I attempted to detain the subject for further questioning, she physically resisted and pulled away from lawful restraint. Subject then reached toward my duty weapon in what appeared to be an aggressive motion, requiring immediate defensive action. The attorney's pen stopped moving. He claims you went for his gun? I never moved toward his weapon, Marissa said firmly. Never. My hands were visible the entire time. I kept them raised and open after he first grabbed me. Grant opened his folder and withdrew several photographs taken at the scene. Mercer's signature appears on this report as a witnessing officer confirming Rourke's version of events. But look at this. He spread out copies of Mercer's original handwritten notes, obtained through the federal preservation request. The deputy marshal pointed to specific lines written in Mercer's careful script. Mercer's notes from the scene mention that dispatch confirmed ownership. They mention Rourke applying handcuffs after the verification, but there's no mention of any movement toward a weapon. No mention of aggressive behavior. No mention of resistance beyond the subject asking questions about the detention. The attorney compared the handwritten notes with Mercer's typed signature on the final report. So Mercer signed off on allegations that don't appear in his own contemporaneous notes? That's exactly right, Grant confirmed. Either Mercer forgot what he witnessed, or someone convinced him to support a version of events that contradicts his original observations. Marissa's phone buzzed with a news alert. The local television station had just published breaking coverage of the incident. She opened the link and found herself watching body camera footage that made her stomach clench with recognition and fury. The clip began with Rourke's hand already gripping her jacket. She watched herself pulling her shoulder away from his grasp, while his voice commanded her to stop resisting. The footage showed her face twisted with confusion and fear as she tried to maintain her balance against the Ferrari's side. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Rourke's voice ordered from the speakers. "I am not resisting," her own voice responded. "I have done nothing wrong." The clip ended with her being placed in handcuffs, while bystanders shouted protests in the background. "This makes me look guilty," Marissa said quietly. "Anyone watching this footage would assume I was fighting the officers and deserved to be arrested." Grant studied the video timestamp carefully. "Judge, when exactly did Rourke first grab your jacket? Before or after you showed him your identification?" "After. He grabbed me after I'd shown him my license, after dispatch confirmed ownership, after he'd seen my judicial credentials. He grabbed me because I asked whether I was being detained or arrested." The attorney paused the video and pointed to the timestamp. "This footage begins at 14 minutes and 23 seconds, into the encounter according to the camera's internal clock. What happened during the first 14 minutes? Grant pulled out his scene photographs and spread them across the table. The images showed Rourke's body camera with its bright recording indicator clearly visible. The timestamp on Grant's photos preceded the released video by several minutes. "Lieutenant Voss claims the camera activated late due to technical issues," Grant explained, "but my photographs prove the recording light was already active when I arrived. That camera was running before any physical contact occurred." Marissa's phone rang. The caller ID showed Lieutenant Voss's direct line. "Judge Cole," Voss said when she answered. "I'm calling to discuss a resolution to this unfortunate situation. The department recognizes that emotions ran high during the parking lot encounter, and we're prepared to be reasonable." "I'm listening," Marissa replied, activating the speaker function so Grant and her attorney could hear. "We're prepared to drop the obstruction and weapon interference charges immediately. The Ferrari will be released this afternoon with a full apology for any inconvenience. All you need to do is sign a confidential statement acknowledging that the officer's actions resulted from a reasonable misunderstanding rather than misconduct." The attorney shook her head firmly, but Marissa answered calmly. "Lieutenant Voss, what you're describing isn't a reasonable misunderstanding. It's an attempt to cover up civil rights violations with a confidential agreement that protects officers who ignored evidence and arrested me after ownership was confirmed. Judge Cole, I think you should consider how this situation appears to the public. The body camera footage speaks for itself. A private resolution protects everyone's reputation and allows us to move forward professionally." "The body camera footage shows exactly what you want it to show," Marissa replied. "Nothing more and nothing less." "I'm sorry you feel that way, The offer remains open if you reconsider." The line went dead. Grant examined the video timestamp again, comparing it with his photographic evidence and the dispatch logs. "Judge, there's a 37-second gap between when my photos show the camera recording and when this official footage begins. 37 seconds that included the ownership confirmation, your identification display, and Rourke's decision to grab you anyway." Marissa stared at the frozen video frame, showing her face pressed against the Ferrari's red paint. Those 37 seconds contain the truth about who started this confrontation. Marshal Grant? And Lieutenant Voss knows that missing interval will destroy his officer's credibility if it ever becomes public. The impound facility sat behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, its gravel lot filled with vehicles in various states of abandonment and legal limbo. Marissa pulled her rental car up to the security gate while Grant displayed his federal credentials to the guard. The afternoon sun reflected harshly off dozens of windshields, creating a maze of metallic glare and shadow. "Judge Cole and Deputy U.S. Marshal Grant for vehicle inspection," Grant announced, handing over the court order. "We're here regarding the red Ferrari SF90. The guard examined the paperwork carefully before waving them through. "Bay 7, ma'am. Follow the yellow signs." They drove slowly through the facility's narrow lanes, passing rows of impounded vehicles that told silent stories of accidents, arrests, and administrative seizures. Marissa's Ferrari sat apart from the others in a designated evidence section, its brilliant red paint dulled by several days of accumulated dust. As they approached, Marissa felt her chest tighten with anger. Two figures stood beside her car. Officer Rourke had his hand on the driver's door handle while Officer Mercer watched nervously from several feet away. The door hung open, and Rourke was reaching up toward the security camera mount behind the windshield with what appeared to be a small screwdriver. "Stop right there," Grant called out as he exited his vehicle. "Step away from the Ferrari immediately." Rourke straightened and turned toward them, the screwdriver still in his hand. "Marshal, this is a routine evidence examination. We're authorized to inspect impounded vehicles." "Where's your evidence technician?" Grant demanded. "Where's your supervisor? Where's your chain of custody documentation?" Mercer shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Grant pulled out his camera and began photographing the scene, comparing each image with the original pictures he'd taken when the Ferrari was first impounded. The driver's door that had been sealed shut now gaped open. A yellow tamper seal that should have been intact across the doorframe had been cut and hung loosely from one corner. "This vehicle was under federal evidence preservation," Marissa said, approaching the Ferrari but careful not to touch anything. "Any examination requires neutral oversight and proper documentation." "Don't lecture me about procedure, lady," Rourke snapped. "You think your judge title gives you the right to interfere with police business? You're not in your courtroom now." Marissa reached into her folder and withdrew the inspection order, holding it up so both officers could see the official seal and signature. "This authorization comes from Federal Judge Patricia Martinez, not from me. I recused myself from any decisions involving this case to ensure complete impartiality." Rourke grabbed the paper and studied it closely, his face reddening as he read. "This is harassment. You're using your connections to manipulate the system." "I'm using the legal process available to any citizen whose property has been improperly seized," Marissa replied evenly. Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence independently and determined that neutral inspection was warranted. Grant continued photographing, capturing close-up images of the disturbed seal, the open door, and Rourke's position near the camera mount. "Officer Rourke, explain why you're attempting to access the vehicle's security system without proper authorization." "I wasn't accessing anything. I was just looking." "With a screwdriver?" "Standard equipment inspection." Grant compared his new photographs with the originals on his phone screen. "The mileage reading has changed by 43 miles since impound. The driver's seat position is different. Items in the glove compartment appear to have been moved. A heavy-set man in a supervisor's uniform approached from the facility office. "What's going on here? I'm Manager Davidson. Nobody told me about any unauthorized vehicle access." Grant showed him the federal credentials and court order. "We found Officers Rourke and Mercer conducting an undocumented examination of evidence under federal preservation. The tamper seals have been broken." Davidson examined the disturbed seal and pulled out a clipboard. "Officers, I need to see your authorization paperwork for this examination. Department policy requires supervisor approval and witness documentation for any evidence vehicle access." Rourke's jaw tightened. "We don't need special permission to examine seized evidence." "You do in my facility," Davidson replied firmly, "especially when federal preservation orders are in place." He began writing in his log. "Officer Rourke, Officer Mercer, you're both being entered into the breach documentation. Any future access to this vehicle requires neutral witness oversight and advance notification." Mercer's face had grown pale as he watched Davidson record their names. "Sir, I was just observing. I didn't touch anything." "Your presence during unauthorized access makes you complicit," Davidson explained, continuing to write. "This goes into the permanent facility record and gets copied to the district attorney's office." Grant photographed the log entry as Davidson completed it, ensuring an independent record of the documentation. The facility manager then placed new tamper seals across all access points of the Ferrari, signing and dating each one with witnesses present. "Officers Rourke and Mercer, you are hereby barred from unsupervised access to this vehicle," Davidson announced. "Any future examination requests must go through proper channels with neutral oversight." Rourke's face darkened with fury, but he couldn't argue with impound facility policy. He threw the screwdriver into his equipment bag and stalked toward the exit, his boots crunching angrily on the gravel. Mercer hesitated, looking back at the Ferrari with obvious anxiety. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered to Grant. "None of this was supposed to happen." "What exactly was supposed to happen, Officer Mercer?" Grant asked quietly. But Mercer had already turned away, following his partner toward the gate with reluctant, heavy steps. For the first time, visible distance had opened between the two officers who had arrested Marissa together. Marissa watched them leave, noting how Mercer lagged several paces behind Rourke and avoided looking back at the Ferrari they could no longer control. The next morning brought a crisp autumn breeze that rattled the windows of Marissa's home office as she spread the federal preservation documents across her desk. Grant sat across from her, his expression grim as he organized the stack of papers into chronological order. 23 luxury vehicle stops in the past 18 months, Grant said, sliding the first batch toward her. All handled by Lieutenant Voss's unit, all following the same basic pattern. Marissa picked up the top report and began reading. The document described a traffic stop involving a black woman driving a white Mercedes-Benz convertible. The initial radio call mentioned suspicious vehicle movement in an upscale shopping district. The woman was detained for suspected auto theft until dispatch confirmed her ownership. Then the charge shifted to obstruction of justice when she questioned why the stop continued after verification. "Look at this language," Marissa said, pointing to a specific paragraph. The subject became verbally aggressive and attempted to use her alleged ownership status to intimidate responding officers. Grant nodded. "Now look at page 4 of your report." Marissa flipped through her own arrest paperwork until she found the matching section. The wording was nearly identical. The subject became verbally aggressive and attempted to use her judicial position to intimidate responding officers. "They copied and pasted," she said, her voice flat with controlled anger. "It gets worse." Grant handed her another file. This one involved a black man with a Porsche. Same location, same officers, same outcome. "Look who signed as the witnessing officer." Marissa scanned the signature line. Dean Mercer. "And here's another with a Lexus." Grant placed a third report in front of her. Primary Officer Travis Rourke. Supporting Officer Dean Mercer. Same supervisor, Wade Voss. The pattern emerged with sickening clarity as they worked through the stack. Every stop began with an assumption of theft. Every driver produced legitimate ownership documents. Every case transformed into obstruction charges when the drivers questioned the continued detention. The vehicles remained impounded for weeks, while their owners paid escalating storage fees just to recover property that already belonged to them. None of them were convicted of stealing their cars? Marissa asked, though she already knew the answer. Not one, Grant confirmed. But look at the financial impact. Average towing fee, $400. Daily storage, $55. Most vehicles stayed impounded for 2 to 3 weeks while the obstruction charges were processed. That's another $800 to $1,200 in fees. Marissa calculated quickly. $1,500 to $2,000 just to get your own car back. Plus attorney fees if they chose to fight the obstruction charges. Most people paid the fines and recovered their vehicles rather than risk a trial. The cruelty of the system became clear. Voss's unit had discovered they could generate revenue and assert dominance by targeting expensive cars driven by black owners. The initial theft accusation provided justification for the stop. When ownership was verified, the charge shifted to obstruction, a subjective accusation that was difficult to disprove and rarely resulted in serious consequences if the driver chose not to contest it. They turned verified ownership into probable cause for harassment, Marissa said. Grant pulled out his laptop and opened a spreadsheet. I've been tracking the financial patterns. Voss's unit generated over $40,000 in impound fees from these stops alone. The department gets a percentage of those revenues. Financial incentive for abuse, Marissa murmured. No wonder Voss refuses to admit what happened to me. My case isn't just about 2 officers making a mistake. It's about exposing a protected revenue stream built on racial profiling. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at her quiet residential street. The morning sun cast long shadows across perfectly maintained lawns and driveways where expensive cars sat without attracting police attention. The contrast was stark and deliberate. This explains why Voss escalated instead of de-escalating, she continued. A private apology would have admitted the method. He needed to make me the problem instead of acknowledging the pattern. Grant closed the laptop. Your attorney called this morning. The city offered a settlement, full dismissal of charges, return of the Ferrari, and a confidential payment of $50,000. They want a signed agreement that the stop resulted from a reasonable misunderstanding. Marissa turned back to face him. What did she tell them? She said she'd present the offer to you, but she recommended against accepting it. Good. Marissa returned to the desk and gathered the reports into a neat stack. Because I'm not interested in $50,000 or a quiet resolution. I want every version of every report. I want server access logs. I want timestamps showing exactly when these documents were revised and by whom. That's going to require additional court orders, Grant warned. The city will fight comprehensive disclosure. Let them fight. These reports prove Voss's unit has been operating the same scheme for months, but they also prove something else. She tapped the stack of papers with her finger. They prove that what happened to me was not spontaneous police work. It was a calculated method applied systematically to black drivers in expensive cars. Grant made notes in his investigation file. I'll work with your attorney to expand the preservation demands. We'll need to include personnel files, training records, and internal communications about luxury vehicle stops. And I want to know exactly when Voss accessed my report, Marissa added, because if he opened that file before Rourke's weapon allegation appeared, then we have proof the retaliation was coordinated from the top. I'll check the server logs today, Grant promised. As he gathered his materials to leave, Grant paused at the door. Judge, These records show that at least 23 other people went through versions of what happened to you. Most of them paid the fees and moved on because fighting seemed too expensive or too risky. Marissa nodded slowly. That's exactly why we can't accept a private settlement. Quiet resolutions protect the system. Those 23 people deserve to know their cases are being reopened. 2 hours later, Grant called with the server access information. Voss opened your report file 4 times, he reported. The first access was 6 minutes after your booking was completed. The weapon allegation didn't appear in Rourke's statement until 2 hours later. But here's the important part. Voss accessed the file twice between Rourke's original statement and the revised version. Marissa felt a surge of vindication. He was coordinating the cover-up in real time. That's what it looks like. The access logs show exactly when each revision was made and which administrator account approved the changes. The pattern was complete. Voss had not simply failed to control his officers. He had actively directed the transformation of a wrongful arrest into a sustained campaign against Marissa's credibility and career. Grant arrived at the federal courthouse carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who had uncovered something significant. The security checkpoint recognized him immediately, and he made his way through the marble corridors to Judge Cole's chambers on the 3rd floor. Marissa was standing behind her desk, methodically placing case files into storage boxes. The mahogany shelves that usually held active litigation materials were nearly empty. Her law books remained, but the working documents of her judicial responsibilities were being carefully archived. "Judge Cole," Grant said, entering after her assistant waved him through. "I have the server revision history you requested." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, without looking up from the file she was boxing. "Tell me what you found." Grant opened his folder and spread several printed documents across the desk. Mercer's original incident report contains no mention of any attempt to touch Officer Rourke's weapon. None. His first draft describes you as standing with both hands visible while Rourke grabbed your jacket. He wrote that you remained calm and asked whether you were being detained. Marissa finally looked up from her packing. And when did that change? The weapon allegation appears 90 minutes later, after 3 separate administrative accesses to the document. Grant pointed to a time-stamped log. The first revision was minor, correcting a spelling error. The second revision added language about your aggressive posture. The third revision inserted 2 sentences describing your hand moving toward Rourke's equipment belt. Who made the accesses? Voss's administrative account was logged for all 3 revisions. But here's where it gets interesting. Grant pulled out a second document. The automatic body camera upload system created a partial backup before local administrators restricted federal access to the files. I obtained that backup through the judicial security protocols. Marissa stopped packing and sat down. What does it contain? Grant connected his laptop to the monitor on her conference table. Audio and video from the first 4 minutes of the encounter. The quality isn't perfect because it's an automatic compression, but it captures several crucial exchanges. He pressed play. The recording began with muffled voices and movement as Mercer activated his camera. Then the audio cleared, revealing the familiar sound of police radio chatter and distant traffic. "Vehicle registration confirmed," came the dispatcher's voice through Mercer's earpiece. 2021 Ferrari SF90. Registered owner Marissa Evelyn Cole, Federal Judicial Identification verified. Mercer's voice responded quietly. "Copy that." A moment later, they heard Rourke's louder voice. "I don't care what dispatch says. She's got fraudulent papers." "Travis," Mercer said, his voice carrying uncertainty. "The registration matches her license. Same name, same address." "Then she can explain it downtown," Rourke replied dismissively. The recording continued with sounds of movement and distant crowd noise. Then a new voice entered the conversation. Wade Voss, arriving on scene. "What's the status?" Voss asked. "Suspected auto theft?" Rourke answered. but dispatch confirms she's the registered owner. There was a long pause before Voss spoke again, his voice lower but still audible. Lose the theft. Make it obstruction. Say she became physically aggressive when you tried to verify ownership. Grant stopped the playback. This was uploaded automatically to an external backup server before anyone realized the Federal Marshal Service would be involved. The department has now challenged our access to the remaining files and filed a formal complaint accusing me of interfering with a local investigation. Marissa leaned back in her chair, absorbing the implications. They're claiming you overstepped your authority? Lieutenant Voss called my supervisor this morning. He's arguing that judicial security officers have no jurisdiction over local traffic stops, even when federal judges are involved. He wants me removed from any evidence collection related to your case. And your supervisor's response? She told Voss that threatening a federal officer could constitute obstruction of justice. Grant smiled grimly. But she also ordered me to document every evidence request through proper legal channels. No shortcuts, no informal access, everything by the book. Marissa nodded approvingly. She's protecting both you and the integrity of whatever we uncover. That's exactly the right approach. Grant gathered the printed logs and returned them to his folder. Judge, I have to ask, are you prepared for them to escalate this further? Voss isn't just covering for 2 officers anymore. He's protecting a systematic revenue stream built on targeting black drivers. I understand the stakes, Marissa replied, returning to her file boxes. But I also understand something else. Every shortcut we take, every procedural corner we cut, gives them ammunition to claim the evidence was obtained improperly. We have to be absolutely perfect. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. She glanced at the screen and her expression hardened. What is it? Grant asked. Marissa turned the phone so he could see the message header. Official notification from the Federal Judicial Council. Lieutenant Voss has filed a formal conduct complaint against me. She opened the email and read aloud. Federal Judge Marissa Cole is accused of invoking her judicial office to intimidate local law enforcement officers during a legitimate traffic investigation. The complaint alleges that Judge Cole directed a federal marshal to interfere with evidence collection and used her position to avoid accountability for unlawful resistance to arrest. Grant shook his head in disgust. He's putting you on trial. That's exactly what he's doing. Marissa forwarded the email to her attorney. Voss realizes the evidence is closing in around him, so he's trying to make me the aggressor. If he can convince a review panel that I abused my judicial authority, it undermines everything else we've uncovered. What does this mean for your caseload? Temporary restriction of active duties while the complaint is reviewed. I can't preside over cases until the Judicial Council determines whether my conduct warrants discipline. She gestured to the storage boxes. That's why I'm packing. The irony was bitter and obvious. The same officers who had arrested her for supposedly stealing her own car were now using the legal system to attack her career and reputation. They had transformed a wrongful traffic stop into a coordinated campaign against her professional standing. Grant closed his laptop and stood to leave. How long will the review take? Weeks, possibly months. Voss is betting that I'll accept a quiet settlement rather than risk permanent damage to my judicial career. Marissa sealed another storage box with packing tape. He's betting wrong. As Grant reached the door, he turned back. Judge, the partial recording I obtained. It proves Voss coordinated the cover-up from the moment he arrived. But the department is fighting hard to prevent us from accessing the complete files. Then we'll get court orders for everything, Marissa said firmly. Server logs, administrative access records, original footage, revised reports, all of it. Voss wanted to make this about my conduct as a judge. Fine. Let's see how his conduct as a police supervisor holds up under the same scrutiny. 30 minutes later, Marissa received another email. This one from the court administrator officially suspending her active caseload pending resolution of the conduct complaint. Her nameplate would remain on the door, but her courtroom would be temporarily reassigned. The message was clear. Voss had successfully weaponized the judicial review process against her, creating consequences that extended far beyond a wrongful arrest beside a red Ferrari. The morning security checkpoint at the federal courthouse felt different. Marissa passed through the metal detector carrying only her briefcase and phone. No case files, no hearing preparations, no stack of motions requiring review. The guards who usually greeted her with respectful nods now watched her with curious uncertainty. Her footsteps echoed in the marble hallway as she walked toward chambers she could no longer officially occupy. The brass nameplate still read, Judge Marissa Cole, but the courtroom beyond those doors would remain empty today. At the elevator, she encountered Judge Patricia Hammond from the district court next door. "Marissa," Hammond said quietly, "I heard about the Judicial Council complaint. News travels fast. It's already affecting assignment schedules. 3 of your cases were reassigned yesterday, and 2 more this morning." Hammond lowered her voice further. "The chief judge is concerned about the optics. A federal judge accused of intimidating police officers. It creates complications for everyone." Marissa pressed the elevator button and waited. "Patricia, did you watch the body camera footage that's been circulating? The department released an edited version. It shows you pulling away from the officer and him shouting about resistance." Hammond's expression grew troubled. "But the timing seems strange. Why does the recording start after initial contact?" "Because the first 37 seconds would tell a different story." The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside together. Hammond studied Marissa's face as the doors closed. "You're not taking a settlement, are you?" "No, I'm not. Even if it means months of restricted duties? Even if the council recommends suspension?" Marissa looked directly at her colleague. "Patricia, how many luxury cars have you seen seized during traffic stops in this district? How many black drivers accused of stealing vehicles they legally own?" Hammond was quiet for several floors. When the elevator reached her floor, she paused in the doorway. "Be careful, Marissa. They're playing for your entire career now." Marissa spent the morning reviewing case law on evidence tampering and police misconduct. Without active judicial duties, she could focus entirely on understanding the legal landscape surrounding her own situation. The irony was profound. She was researching federal civil rights violations from the perspective of a victim rather than a judge. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. The local television station was broadcasting a segment titled, "Federal Judge Claims Police Harassment." The story featured the edited body camera footage, an interview with Lieutenant Voss discussing police accountability, and commentary from unnamed legal experts questioning whether federal judges should receive special treatment during traffic stops. She watched Voss speaking directly to the camera. Judge Cole had every opportunity to resolve this matter quietly and professionally. Instead, she chose to weaponize her judicial position against officers who were simply doing their job. The evidence clearly shows resistance to a lawful investigation. The edited footage played again. Viewers saw her arm moving away from Rourke's grip, while his voice shouted, "Stop resisting!" The sequence was brief, tightly cropped, and devastating to anyone who didn't know what happened in the preceding seconds. At noon, Grant called with an update on the evidence review scheduled at the impound facility. The independent court granted access to examine the Ferrari's condition and remaining systems, he reported. But the department insisted on having officers present during any inspection. Which officers? Rourke and Mercer. They're claiming supervisory responsibility for the evidence. Marissa gathered her jacket and car keys. "Then we'll see them at 2 o'clock. The impound facility sat behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Marissa arrived in her rental car, a modest sedan that drew no attention from passing motorists. The contrast with her Ferrari was intentional. Today, she needed to project the image of someone seeking justice rather than privilege. Grant waited near the entrance with a court-appointed evidence examiner. Through the fence, Marissa could see her red Ferrari sitting in the secured lot, covered with a blue tarp that fluttered in the afternoon wind. Rourke emerged from the facility office as they approached the gate. His uniform was crisp, his demeanor confident. Beside him, Mercer looked uncomfortable but said nothing. "Judge Cole," Rourke said with exaggerated formality, "surprised to see you here personally. Most people in your position would send lawyers to handle the details. Most people in my position weren't arrested beside their own vehicle," Marissa replied evenly. Rourke unlocked the gate and led them toward the Ferrari. "You know, this whole situation could have been avoided. Lieutenant Voss made you a fair offer. Acknowledge it was a misunderstanding, sign the agreement, take your car, and move on. Instead, you decided to make it about race and police misconduct." The evidence examiner began photographing the Ferrari's condition while Grant documented the surrounding area. Marissa watched Rourke carefully. "Officer Rourke," she said, "do you remember removing the memory card from the camera system?" Rourke's smile was predatory. "Yeah, I remember. Standard procedure when securing potential evidence." "And what happened to that memory card?" "Processed according to department protocol. Examined, catalogued, and stored." His confidence was absolute. "Whatever you think was on there, it's been properly reviewed by our technical specialists." Marissa nodded slowly. "I see. So you believe you've accounted for all the recordings from that afternoon. Everything that matters, everything admissible." Rourke gestured toward the Ferrari's interior. "That little camera setup might have impressed you, but we know how to handle sophisticated equipment." Grant continued recording their conversation from a lawful distance, his federal credentials clearly visible. Rourke noticed the documentation but showed no concern. "You're wasting government resources on this vendetta," Rourke told Marissa. "The Judicial Council complaint is just the beginning. Every time you push this further, it gets worse for you." "Officer Rourke," Marissa said quietly, "when you removed that memory card, did you check whether the system had remote backup capabilities?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Rourke's expression, but he recovered quickly. "Doesn't matter. Local storage, remote storage, whatever. Nothing useful survived that camera." The evidence examiner completed his initial inspection and began preparing departure paperwork. As the group walked back toward the gate, Mercer lingered near Grant. "Marshal," Mercer said quietly, "can I ask you something privately?" Grant glanced toward Marissa, who nodded slightly. Rourke was already walking ahead, talking loudly about evidence protocols and judicial overreach. "What is it, Officer Mercer?" Mercer looked around nervously, confirming that Rourke was out of hearing range. "The reports we filed. How detailed are the computer logs for revisions and changes?" "Server logs preserve every keystroke, timestamp, and user access. Why do you ask?" Mercer's face went pale. I wrote the initial report that night, but when Lieutenant Voss reviewed it the next morning, he said it needed clarification. He accessed my account and made adjustments to ensure accuracy." Grant kept his voice neutral. "What kind of adjustments?" "Language about Judge Cole's behavior, details about her hand movements near equipment. Voss said supervisors routinely clean up officer statements to prevent misinterpretation." Mercer paused, clearly struggling. "But the final version said things I didn't actually observe. Are you willing to provide a sworn statement about those changes?" Mercer looked toward Rourke, who was now at the gate, then back at Grant. Fear dominated his expression. "I can't. If Voss finds out I talked to you, he'll blame me for everything. He'll say I wrote false information initially, and he was just correcting my mistakes." Mercer shook his head. "I have 18 years on the force. I can't lose my pension over one bad stop." Grant watched as Mercer walked quickly toward the gate, joining Rourke for the return to their patrol car. The alliance was fracturing, but fear still held it together. As they drove away, Marissa's phone chimed with an email notification. The independent federal court had scheduled an evidentiary hearing on the disputed recordings for the following week. The message was brief but significant. All parties would be required to present complete and unaltered evidence under oath, with federal penalties for any submission found to be doctored or incomplete. The independent hearing room buzzed with tension as Marissa took her seat at the plaintiff's table. 2 days of expedited filings had moved the case forward with unusual speed. Deputy Marshal Grant sat beside her, a thick folder of evidence documentation spread between them. Across the room, Lieutenant Voss conferred quietly with the city's legal team, while Officer Rourke stared straight ahead, his jaw set in defiant anger. Judge Rebecca Morrison called the session to order. "We're here to examine the preservation and integrity of evidence in the arrest of Judge Marissa Cole. The court will review police recordings, dispatch transmissions, and digital evidence protocols." The city's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, after thorough review, we've discovered that the original police server contained additional footage that was temporarily inaccessible due to technical issues. We're prepared to grant full access to all unaltered recordings." Marissa felt a cautious surge of relief. Grant leaned forward, making notes as the attorney continued. "Furthermore, pending this review, Officers Rourke and Mercer have been placed on temporary administrative suspension. The vehicle in question will be released to Judge Cole immediately following this hearing." Judge Morrison nodded. "Marshal Grant, please present your preservation findings." Grant rose, connecting his laptop to the courtroom display. "Your Honor, our investigation identified multiple discrepancies between the publicly released footage and the metadata from the original police recordings. The released version begins 43 seconds after the officers' cameras were activated. The screen filled with timestamp data showing the gap. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as reporters scribbled notes. Additionally, Grant continued, dispatch records confirm that vehicle ownership was verified at 2:47 p.m., while the arrest occurred at 2:52 p.m. Judge Cole was handcuffed despite confirmed ownership of the Ferrari. Rourke shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mercer stared at his hands, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Judge Morrison studied the timeline. The court orders immediate access to the complete, unaltered police server. No further editing or administrative access will be permitted without court supervision. The city attorney nodded. "Understood, Your Honor. We'll coordinate transfer within 2 hours." "Excellent!" Judge Morrison looked toward Marissa. "Judge Cole, the impounded vehicle will be released to you this afternoon. The court apologizes for any inconvenience caused by the extended seizure." For the first time in days, Marissa allowed herself to hope. The officers were suspended, the server would be accessible, and her Ferrari was coming home. She caught Grant's eye and saw his slight smile of satisfaction. Then Lieutenant Voss stood up. "Your Honor, if I may." His voice carried calm authority. "During our internal technical review, we recovered additional footage that was corrupted during the initial server backup. Our IT department was able to restore the original recording." Grant tensed. Marissa felt ice form in her stomach. This recovered footage provides crucial context that was missing from both the public release and our preliminary preservation efforts. Voss handed a flash drive to the bailiff. "We believe this evidence significantly clarifies the circumstances surrounding Judge Cole's arrest." Judge Morrison accepted the drive. "Play the footage." The courtroom screen flickered to life, showing Marissa beside the Ferrari's open door. The angle was tighter than the edited version, focused on her upper body and Rourke's position. The timestamp showed the correct starting time, filling the mysterious gap. Marissa watched herself speaking calmly to Rourke. Then, in what appeared to be a single fluid motion, her right hand moved toward the officer's belt line. Rourke immediately grabbed her wrist, shouting, "Don't reach for my weapon!" The movement looked deliberate, threatening, aggressive. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Reporters furiously typed on their phones. Judge Morrison replayed the sequence twice, studying the motion frame by frame. Marissa stared at the screen in shock. She remembered every second of the confrontation. Her hands had never moved toward Rourke's holster. Never. But the footage showed something that looked convincingly real. "This recovered evidence," the city attorney said, "demonstrates that Officer Rourke's use of force was justified in response to Judge Cole's apparent attempt to access his weapon. We'll be referring this matter to the prosecutor's office for felony review." Grant was already analyzing the metadata on his laptop, but his expression grew grim as he worked. Judge Morrison's tone hardened. Given this new evidence, the court cannot proceed with the current preservation order. The administrative suspension of Officers Rourke and Mercer is hereby lifted pending prosecutorial review. They will return to limited duty immediately. Marissa felt the courtroom spinning around her. Victory had transformed into catastrophe within minutes. Her reputation, her career, her freedom, everything was suddenly at risk again. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "I'm recommending that the Federal Judicial Council place Judge Cole on temporary administrative leave pending resolution of the felony investigation." Rourke smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. Mercer exhaled with visible relief. Voss nodded gravely, as if disappointed by the necessity of revealing such damaging evidence. That evening, Marissa sat alone inside her returned Ferrari in her home garage. The SF90's red leather seats felt foreign after days of absence. She ran her hands over the steering wheel, trying to process how completely the situation had reversed. The car was hers again, but everything else was gone. She reached for the dashboard display and began reconnecting the security system to her protected home network. The process required entering multiple passwords and biometric confirmations, layers of encryption she had insisted upon when the system was installed. As the final connection established, a small notification appeared on the screen. "Remote event backup complete." The blue recording light behind the windshield glowed steadily, indicating active status. Marissa stared at it, remembering Rourke's triumphant expression as he removed the memory card days earlier. He had destroyed the local storage, but he had never asked about remote backup. That evening, without delay, Marissa called Grant. "Marshal, I need you here immediately. Bring a certified digital evidence specialist. The Ferrari has something they don't know about." Grant's voice sharpened with attention. "What kind of something?" "Remote backup. Everything they think they destroyed is sitting in an encrypted cloud server." Marissa stared at the blue recording light, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The entire confrontation, all 37 seconds they claimed, were lost. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't touch anything else on that system." Grant arrived with Special Agent Kim Torres, a federal digital evidence specialist, carrying a sealed laptop and documentation cameras. Torres had spent 15 years extracting truth from manipulated files, corrupted servers, and deleted records. Her reputation for ironclad chain of custody procedures made her testimony unassailable in federal court. "Judge Cole, I need to document every step of this process," Torres explained, setting up her equipment in the garage. Any deviation from protocol could compromise the evidence's admissibility. Marissa stepped back from the Ferrari. "Whatever you need. This has to survive every challenge they're going to throw at it." Torres photographed the vehicle's interior, the dashboard display, the connection status, and the security system's interface. She documented the network credentials, encryption protocols, and automatic backup settings. Every keystroke was recorded as she accessed the protected server through multiple authentication layers. The download began at 8:47 p.m. Torres narrated each step for the audio record, while Grant maintained visual documentation of the entire process. The system shows one remote event backup from the date in question. File size indicates approximately 12 minutes of dual-angle recording. Metadata confirms automatic upload at 3:15 p.m. on the day of arrest, 17 minutes after the confrontation began. Grant checked his notes. That matches the timeline. The officers were still at scene when this uploaded. The download completed. Torres transferred the encrypted file to her secured laptop using documented forensic protocols. Her screen filled with two video windows, one showing the Ferrari's interior, the other capturing the scene through the windshield. "Playback beginning," Torres announced. The footage was crystal clear. The wide-angle interior camera captured Marissa's position in the driver's seat, her open hands visible on the steering wheel, and the reflection of both officers through the side mirrors. The windshield camera showed Rourke approaching the vehicle with aggressive body language, while Mercer positioned himself near the patrol cars. Audio quality was exceptional. Every word was audible. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. Where'd you steal this car?" "Officer, I own this vehicle. My registration and insurance—" "Yeah, right. Nobody like you owns a car like this." Marissa watched herself calmly exit the Ferrari, both hands clearly visible and empty. The camera captured Rourke's position, the distance to his holster, and every movement she made. At no point did her hands approach his weapon. Then came the crucial exchange. Mercer's voice through his radio earpiece was perfectly audible. "Dispatch confirms registered owner Marissa Evelyn Cole, same name on the driver's license." Mercer turned toward his partner. "Travis, dispatch has her as the registered owner." Rourke's response was unmistakable. "I already told everybody she stole it. Can't back down now." Grant paused the playback. "There it is. Proof of ownership confirmed, and he chose to continue anyway." The recording showed Rourke grabbing Marissa's jacket first. Her hands remained at her sides throughout the physical contact. The angle clearly demonstrated that she never reached toward his holster, never made any threatening gesture, never resisted his commands. Torres advanced to the timestamp matching Voss's arrival. The lieutenant's voice carried clearly through the Ferrari's open door as he spoke to his officers. "Lose the theft charge. Make it obstruction and weapon interference. We can't have this video showing up in court." Voss had unknowingly spoken directly into the recording system he didn't know existed. "The metadata is decisive," Torres explained, examining the file properties. "Automatic upload at 3:15 p.m., 17 minutes after initial contact. The encryption timestamp proves this recording was created and secured before the officers left the scene. There's no possible way this could have been manufactured in response to later accusations." Grant compared the Ferrari footage with Voss's supposed recovered original on a split screen. The differences were immediately obvious. The police version contained duplicated frames where natural motion should flow smoothly. A 3-second interval was missing entirely. Most damaging, the export log showed the altered file originated from Voss's administrative account at 11:30 p.m. on the day after Marissa's arrest. "He created the false version," Grant said. "We can prove when, where, and how." Torres burned the evidence to multiple secured drives using federal protocols. She generated cryptographic hashes proving the file's integrity and prepared chain-of-custody documentation that would survive any courtroom challenge. While Torres completed her work, Grant contacted federal prosecutors. Within 2 hours, investigators were using the Ferrari evidence, the prior luxury vehicle seizure records, and the altered report logs to obtain sealed arrest warrants. The cases against Rourke, Mercer, and Voss would proceed simultaneously, preventing any coordination between defendants. Back in her garage, Marissa watched the complete video sequence one final time. 12 minutes of unedited truth showing exactly what happened beside her Ferrari. Every lie the officers had told was contradicted by their own voices and actions. She turned to Grant with quiet satisfaction. They spent days trying to erase 37 seconds of truth. Now, they're going to face the same unedited reality they tried to destroy. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as spectators filled every available seat. News cameras lined the hallway outside, and reporters pushed against the security barriers. Word had spread that a federal judge would testify about her own arrest, facing off against the officers who had handcuffed her beside her Ferrari. Marissa entered through a side door, avoiding the media circus. She wore a navy suit and carried herself with the same composed dignity that had sustained her through weeks of public scrutiny. Today, she sat at the complainant's table, not behind the judge's bench. The role reversal felt strange, but necessary. Across the aisle, Officers Travis Rourke and Dean Mercer sat beside their attorney. Lieutenant Wade Voss occupied a separate table with his own legal counsel. All three men maintained expressions of professional confidence, as though their written statements would withstand any challenge. Judge Patricia Henley presided over the hearing with strict authority. She had reviewed the preliminary evidence and understood the gravity of the allegations. Civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice carried serious federal penalties. This hearing will determine whether sufficient evidence exists to support criminal charges, Judge Henley announced. The court will examine all materials without prejudice, regardless of the complainant's judicial position. Deputy U.S. Marshal Elias Grant approached the witness stand carrying 3 thick evidence binders. His testimony would present the case methodically, building from the initial contact through the systematic cover-up that followed. Marshal Grant, please describe your involvement in this matter. Grant's voice remained steady and professional. Your Honor, I responded to a judicial security alert at 3:18 p.m. on the date in question. Upon arrival, I observed Judge Cole in handcuffs beside her registered vehicle while officers refused to acknowledge proof of ownership. He opened the first binder. I will present evidence in chronological order, beginning with dispatch records confirming vehicle ownership before the arrest. The courtroom listened to the radio transmission. Dispatch's voice was crystal clear. License plate registration confirms owner Marissa Evelyn Cole, 1247 Magnolia Drive, clean record. No outstanding warrants. Grant displayed a timestamp showing the confirmation occurred at 3:12 p.m. This ownership verification reached Officer Mercer's earpiece before Judge Cole was handcuffed. Rourke's attorney objected. The officers had reasonable suspicion based on the vehicle's movement through the parking area. Sustained as to the initial approach, Judge Henley ruled. However, the court notes that continued detention after ownership confirmation requires additional justification. Grant presented his photographs, showing both officers' body cameras displaying active recording lights throughout the confrontation. The blue LED indicators were clearly visible in multiple angles. These images prove continuous recording from initial contact. Any missing footage represents intentional deletion, not equipment failure. Next came Mercer's partial upload, recovered before local administrators restricted server access. The file contained 23 seconds of crucial audio, including Rourke's admission that he had already committed publicly to the theft accusation. Officer Rourke's own words demonstrate knowledge that the vehicle belonged to Judge Cole, followed by his decision to proceed with arrest regardless of ownership verification. Grant displayed the report revision logs on the courtroom's main screen. Server records showed each edit, deletion, and administrative access. Voss's account had modified both officers' statements after their initial submission. Lieutenant Voss accessed these reports 7 times over 3 days. Each revision strengthened the weapon interference allegation while removing references to the ownership dispute. The impound facility records followed. Grant's photographs showed the Ferrari's condition upon arrival versus the disturbed seals discovered during the inspection attempt. Security logs confirmed that Rourke and Mercer had accessed the vehicle without authorization. The defendants attempted to alter or remove evidence from the seized vehicle multiple times. Finally, Grant presented the pattern evidence. 14 similar luxury vehicle seizures conducted by Voss's unit over 18 months. Every driver was black. Every vehicle was ultimately returned without theft charges. Every report contained nearly identical obstruction language. This demonstrates systematic targeting of black vehicle owners using fabricated probable cause. Voss's attorney stood. Lieutenant Voss categorically denies directing any cover-up or evidence manipulation. His supervisory edits reflect standard report clarification procedures. Judge Henley reviewed the revision logs. The court notes that these modifications occurred after the defendants learned of Judge Cole's judicial position. The timing suggests reactive rather than routine editing. Grant approached the evidence table. Your Honor, I now present the Ferrari's encrypted security recording, obtained through documented forensic procedures. 2 large monitors displayed the split-screen view. The interior camera showed Marissa's position and hand movements throughout the encounter. The windshield camera captured both officers' positions and actions. The courtroom fell silent as 12 minutes of unedited truth played without interruption. Marissa's hands remained clearly visible on the steering wheel, then at her sides after exiting the vehicle. The distance between her position and Rourke's holster was obvious. At no point did she make any threatening gesture or reach toward his equipment. The audio quality was devastating. Mercer's voice carried clearly. Dispatch has her as the registered owner. Rourke's response was unmistakable. I already told everybody she stole it. Can't back down now? The recording captured Rourke grabbing Marissa first, contradicting every written statement claiming she initiated physical contact. Then came Voss's arrival and his instruction to both officers. Lose the theft charge. Make it obstruction and weapon interference. We can't have this video showing up in court. The lieutenant's face went pale as his own voice filled the courtroom. Under intense questioning, Mercer's composure finally cracked. Lieutenant Voss ordered us to rewrite everything. He said admitting the mistake would expose other stops. Travis removed the camera card because we thought that was the only recording. Federal agents moved quietly into position near the defendant tables as Judge Henley rendered her findings. The court finds probable cause exists for coordinated civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The referral against Judge Cole is dismissed with prejudice. She nodded toward the waiting agents. Execute your warrants. Metal handcuffs clicked as Rourke, Mercer, and Voss were taken into custody, their badges and weapons removed before the packed courtroom. The gavel fell with finality as Judge Henley addressed the packed courtroom one final time. The arrests had created a buzz of whispered conversations and shifting bodies, but silence returned as she spoke. This hearing will now address the complete exoneration of Judge Marissa Cole and the correction of all public records connected to these false charges. Marissa remained seated at the complainant's table, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had watched 3 officers led away in handcuffs without displaying any satisfaction or triumph. The weight of vindication felt different than she had expected, heavier, more serious than relief. Judge Henley continued reading from her prepared statement. The evidence presented demonstrates a coordinated effort to fabricate charges after lawful vehicle ownership was verified. Judge Cole's conduct throughout this incident was exemplary, showing restraint under unlawful detention and refusing to invoke judicial privilege for personal advantage. The formal language carried the power of permanent record. Every word would be filed, copied, and distributed to correct the public narrative that had dominated news coverage for weeks. All criminal referrals against Judge Cole are dismissed with prejudice. Her judicial duties are immediately restored without restriction. The Federal Judicial Council's disciplinary review is terminated based on the evidence of manufactured allegations. Marissa's attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she shook her head slightly. The moment belonged to the legal process, not to personal victory. The city of Millfield is ordered to provide complete mechanical inspection and repair of Judge Cole's vehicle at city expense. All impound costs, storage fees, and administrative charges will be refunded within 14 business days. Judge Henley's tone grew sharper as she addressed the systematic violations. Lieutenant Voss's unit conducted 14 similar luxury vehicle seizures using identical fabricated justifications. Each case will be reopened for independent review. Any vehicles currently held under questionable circumstances will be released immediately to their verified owners. The courtroom stirred as the full scope became clear. 14 families would get their cars back. 14 cases of racial profiling would face scrutiny. The altered video evidence submitted by the defendants constitutes aggravated perjury and will be referred for additional federal prosecution. This court finds the cover-up more damaging to public trust than the original misconduct. Grant watched from the gallery as Marissa absorbed each pronouncement. Her expression remained composed, but he recognized the subtle signs of someone processing vindication after weeks of attack on her character and career. Court is adjourned. The hearing room erupted into activity as reporters rushed toward exits and attorneys gathered their files. Marissa stood slowly, accepting brief congratulations from her legal team before making her way through the crowd. Outside the federal courthouse, afternoon sunlight felt warmer than it had in weeks. Marissa walked down the wide stone steps, ignoring shouted questions from news crews. Grant fell into step beside her, carrying his evidence binders. "Judge Cole, your vehicle is ready for pickup at the municipal garage. They completed the inspection this morning." She nodded, pulling car keys from her purse. The Ferrari key fob felt familiar in her hand after weeks of separation. "I want to see where this started, Marshal Grant. Will you meet me at the shopping center?" "Yes, ma'am." 20 minutes later, Marissa pulled her restored red SF90 into the same luxury shopping center parking lot where Rourke had first grabbed her jacket. The Ferrari's engine purred smoothly, its interior camera remounted and functioning normally. The small blue recording light glowed steadily behind the windshield. Grant's sedan arrived moments later. He walked over carrying a small evidence envelope containing her federal judicial identification card, the same ID that Rourke had dismissed without reading. "Everything is exactly as it was," Grant said, handing her the laminated card. "They cleaned the interior and replaced the damaged door seal where they tried to access the camera system." Marissa accepted her identification, studying the official photograph and federal seal. "Marshal Grant, I need to thank you for something specific. You could have ended this confrontation immediately by ordering my release. Instead, you preserved evidence and let the legal process work. You told me not to take shortcuts, ma'am. You were right. The temptation must have been strong, watching officers treat a federal judge that way." Grant shook his head. "You weren't arrested as a judge. You were arrested as a black woman driving an expensive car. The title didn't change what happened to you. It just changed who would believe you when you fought back." A rumbling diesel engine interrupted their conversation. A white federal transport vehicle turned slowly into the parking lot, heading toward the interstate on-ramp that would carry its prisoners to detention facilities. Through reinforced windows, 3 faces looked out at the luxury shopping center where their careers had ended. Mercer stared down at his shackled hands. Voss gazed ahead with resignation. Rourke pressed against the window glass, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition as he spotted the brilliant red Ferrari. Marissa stood beside her car, key fob in hand. She looked directly at the transport vehicle, meeting Rourke's stare through the security glass. For several long seconds, neither moved. Then she opened the Ferrari's door and settled behind the leather steering wheel. The SF90's engine started with a deep, confident rumble that carried across the parking lot. As Marissa shifted into drive, Rourke watched the woman he had falsely accused, the woman whose car he had tried to turn into evidence against her, pull smoothly away from the curb and accelerate toward the exit. The transport vehicle's rear doors closed with a metallic clang, leaving Rourke in darkness as the Ferrari disappeared into traffic.